Water is a luxury we can't live without. It's perhaps one of the most popular molecular compounds out there. It's clear, fluid, wet, or not. But you know what? I'm sick of it. Why does water get the special treatment above it all? I mean, why not dihydrogen monoxide? It might take up 70% of my body, but I'm not gonna let it take up my life. I'm gonna remove all of the water-based propaganda on these shelves if it's the last thing I do. So I wasn't sure which ones had water and which ones didn't, so I got rid of all of them. I mean, Virtual Boy Wario Land had it coming anyway. But I do feel bad for all the games that I wrongly accused, so out of sympathy, I'm going to choose one random game to have a shot at redemption. And that game is... Super Mario Sunshine. And just like that, I've started a war. On the surface, it's just a Mario game with a water jetpack. But in the reality we live in, this is one of the most divisive Nintendo games to ever have been released. Nobody can seem to come to a concise conclusion on whether this game is good or not. There is no majority when it comes to this game. If you put 100 people who've played this game in a room, none of them are coming back without a few stab wounds. There's an unbelievably large group of people that will preach this game to their neighbors, going door to door and spreading its good news, and there's also an incredibly large group of people dedicated to finding every single copy of this game in order to find more things to add to a landfill. But why? I haven't seen such diverse opinions in any other game that reach the level of inconsistency as this does. Even the people who do like it admit that it definitely has its faults. So it isn't an inherently perfect game, but the people who hate it can also admit that many things about it can make it great. So it isn't really horrible. But there isn't necessarily a side of the argument that's in the middle. There is no sound argument that can evenly balance both sides. If you set out to explain what makes it so great, the negatives will seem like an afterthought. And if you choose to start out explaining why people dislike it, it's hard to think of how the game can be considered good at all. You see why I hate water now? So while it may be hard, I'll try my best to make you understand how I feel about the game. It's one of my favorite games of all time. Sunshine was the last 3D Mario game I got to play. It was already 2020 by the time I got around to playing it. Ironically, the same year it saw its first official re-release. But I bought the GameCube version, and seeing as I loved and played every prior game in the 3D Mario lineage, this brought upon a similar situation. Only after I played it did I hear about the complaints that were being directed towards it, and it made me look at my experience with the game in a completely different light. While I did notice a few flaws during my first playthrough, all of the negative reviews and retrospectives I saw on this game really opened my eyes. I had loved nearly everything about this game, but I came to realize that this game has its issues. I find this to happen a lot with my opinions on 3D Mario games. The only one that stayed consistent over time has been Odyssey. With something like Galaxy 2, one week he's my best friend, the next week he'll be found at the mercy of a trash compactor. Wouldn't be the first time. Super Mario Sunshine is a game I had to play several times before coming to terms with everything that it was, and especially what it wasn't. So I'm not going to hold back anything when going over this game's shortcomings. I'm going to be a lot more critical of this game than I usually am with your everyday Mario adventure, but just know that I'm only doing it for my deep admiration for this game as a whole. Now hold on a second. Creating a sequel to one of the most successful and iconic video games is more than a scary thought to imagine. Pretty sure I just pissed my pants thinking about it. Super Mario 64 was not a perfect game. Far from it, actually. It has way too many missions that make my teeth grind so hard they fall off. The locations are also disjointed and disconnected from each other, and not all of the levels were created equal. But nonetheless, this game set the precedent for what a collectathon should be, and trying to replicate that success is easier said than done, because putting yourself into the shoes of Sunshine's developers, deciding what elements of 64 to improve upon and which ones to downsize in favor of the more improved elements is absolutely nerve-wracking. And I should also mention that this game was being expected to meet a fast approaching deadline, so the developers were under a bit of pressure. With all of these factors in mind, it definitely affected the product in many ways. I find this game's development and reception to be similar to that of Majora's Mask in some respects, while being completely different situations. Majora's Mask was releasing on the same system as its predecessor, and it also had even less time to get itself together, forcing the developers to reuse several assets. But instead of following very similarly to Ocarina of Time's layout and mechanics, being as beloved and cherished as they were, this game was so wildly different that it almost didn't feel like it was even attached to that game. Sunshine might have released on a different system than 64, 64, but it does base itself on that game while also trying to contort it into something completely different. At their cores, 64 and Sunshine are similar games with very similar structures, but one tries to pull a lot more wacky shenanigans than the other, and whether those wacky shenanigans provided for a good result in the end product is up for debate. The one thing that the developers clearly held in high regard that can be agreed upon by most people is its immersive qualities, specifically in Delfino Plaza. Just comparing the hub of 64 to Sunshine, it's clear what exactly this game wanted to focus on. Peach's Castle is among the most iconic video game locations to have ever existed, and while Delfino Plaza doesn't live up to it in those terms, it functions much better as an actual place. It makes sense based on everything the game stands for, which just so happens to be conviction without a fair trial. The whole game is basically a botched vacation where Mario gets falsely accused of severe vandalism and is forced to stay on the island and restore the community. My God, just get this man a lawyer! And while pretty illogical based on logic, it does make you feel kind of bad for the residents of the island, having to live in some annoying darkness. I mean, I squirm in my seat when my phone is at 50% brightness. So I have to give these guys some points for perseverance. All of this makes Delfino Plaza feel like a place where people actually live. There are buildings, structures, areas seen far off in the distance, and even though you're warped through space-time to get to many of the locations in Isle Delfino, that's just it. You stay on Isle Delfino for the entirety of the game. There's even a map showing where everything is across the island, with certain levels having others visible in the distance. Think of Peach's Castle, where you just... I mean, do I really have to say anything about this? You go from a castle in the grand old Mushroom Kingdom to funny water dimension. This isn't a complaint towards 64. That game fully accepts the style and themes of being in a nonsense world where nothing makes sense. Sunshine isn't like that though, and injects a bit of itself with realism in place. The game has vibrant tropical aesthetics throughout its entire world, which can get old when many of them are just different takes on beach and tropical village levels, but each are unique enough to keep me intrigued to see each and every part of the island, and it makes it fun to simply jump all around the place, scouring the roofs, traversing blindly for the sewers, and the game does this all perfectly without a single hit. No. The immersion itself, being as great as it is broken quite often. You see, there are certain stages in the game that detach themselves from the established world and are just in some random void. It would probably fit right in if this were any other mainline Mario game, but because of how this game crafts its world, this makes no sense. The game has many of its platforming challenges take advantage of the areas they're in, with support beams of Rico Harbor as well as the tall trees of Pianta Village coming to mind. This is perfect for how the game presents itself. This is about as immersive as pretending vegetable oil is the greatest drink known to man. I like the stages themselves, as most of them are designed to be mechanically pure in every way, but I feel like there was at least some way these could have been incorporated into the levels themselves. Again, I wouldn't be thinking these things if the game didn't show so much success in the level design of the actual locations. This is part of 64's design trying to inch its way into Sunshine, and it just sticks out like a sore thumb because they're two completely different games. But for a second, let's treat the game like every single level was perfectly integrated into the game, and the aforementioned issue didn't exist. We'd still have the major problem that is the boot out system. Upon receiving any shine sprite at all, you're forced to exit the level. I didn't mind it as much in 64 because every mission felt disconnected from each other, and there wasn't any particular order or layout for how you needed to collect the stars. Every main shine sprite in this game goes in order of episodes, with each one leading to the next, except they don't. The best way to put it is imagine walking halfway to Great Clips and you find $2 on the ground, after which you run all the way home and put your money on the shelf. And only after that do you make the full trip to Great Clips, when the much more logical way to go about it would have been to just stuff the money in your pocket and complete the trip the first time around. Otherwise, you'd just be wasting valuable time. Now imagine Great Clips is P.D. Piranha and the $2 is a red coin challenge, and blam, that's Bianco Hills. In terms of gameplay, the much simpler and logical way to connect the structure of the stage would be to connect the episodes and make each one seamlessly transition into the next, which isn't much of a hard task. But nobody cares about logic. We already established that when we built the justice system. And this frustrates me even more than the levels in the Void ever did, because those are probably just rushed out because the developers didn't have the time needed to flesh them out into the context of the game's world. But this is an easy fix. Sure, it would lower the amount of playtime by a bit, but who cares about that when that playtime is going into something that you've most likely already gone through one or more times? The question that should really be asked though is whether it truly ruins the immersion or not. And to be honest, it's really only bad because of how good the rest is. I'd say that neither of these issues broke the immersion to an unbearable degree. I still enjoy the locations and their inhabitants, but it's these minor annoyances that pile up throughout the course of the game and sometimes make me question what was going on through the developers' minds when crafting the game's world. They broke so far off of how 64 ran things that when it tried to keep elements of that game, it works against this game's design because those concepts belong to another game. Just like how these tag swarms probably got sent to the wrong address. And these pants too. The movement options in this game are the most versatile the series has ever been willing to be. Many people think that the way Mario moves in this game is a bit finicky, and that is true to some extent. I can see why some people might not like it. It doesn't always feel like you're in complete control of Mario because of the game's lack of extreme polish, but I never found it to be much of a problem. I've always thought Mario himself controlled like a dream in this game. FLUDD. This is not helping Water's case. FLUDD is this game's main gimmick. You can fly around in a water-powered jetpack, spray water all over the place, move like the wind, and control boats with really bad steering. They can't all be winners. I both love and hate what FLUDD adds to Sunshine. It controls like I misplaced my soap and water for butter and motor oil. Everything that has to do with him control-wise doesn't feel well polished enough at times. Turning around while hovering is pretty hard to accomplish if you enjoyed the time you spent in this world. The rocket nozzle could send me flying too high up into the air, and I'll lose control, landing me into a spot that's close to my destination, but just off enough to the point where I tread the idea of calling customer support. Spraying water precisely is always a chore, so you have to stop, hit the C stick, read the manual again, and press the trigger. Though even with its problems, it is an extremely useful tool. And that's the problem. FLUDD is the certifiable definition of a crutch. Is it useful in some situations that benefit the level design? Yes, but you can use them to complete even the most basic of platforming that any normal twat could perform. Think of it like you're using a calculator to figure out 2 plus 2. It's stupid, but it can also create an entirely different problem. If you rely on the calculator too much, you might forget how to do something like long division. FLUDD is the calculator in this situation. It makes everything a heck of a lot easier, but it would probably be best that you didn't use it for everything. It can be extremely tedious to work out the whole problem on paper, but if you do, and you keep practicing at it, you'll get better and better each time. The vast majority of the game doesn't give you that opportunity, except for in these levels. As I've said, these levels break immersion in every conceivable way and make me question what kind of world this game's living in. But on the other hand, they're the only parts of the game where FLUDD is taken away from you and you're forced to suck it up. Most people hate these for the reason of FLUDD being taken away from you, as it then forces you to undergo some rather cruel platforming. But I love these stages because of that. For once in this game, you're left with nothing but a gauntlet and all of the skill you can muster. I usually only get this feeling from the final levels of 3D Mario games, but Sunshine invokes that same feeling through these levels. The levels aren't as crazy or attempting to be these be-all end-all experiences that make you show off everything you've learned while playing the game, but this is one of the few times in the Mario series where you're going to have to contend with the challenge as a common occurrence. And the removal of FLUDD in these circumstances helps to balance out how much you rely on him when in the areas themselves. It doesn't balance it out all the way to the point where it completely mitigates the problem, but it makes FLUDD more tolerable as one of the main game mechanics that this game flashes on its vest. Not to mention that it can be really fun to use when given the opportunity, if you manage to work around the unpolished controls, that is. But what I see as the crucial problem with this game is that you're held at gunpoint while trying to beat it. In 64, you're able to go around collecting whatever stars you feel like at any time. If you want to go and do the last star first, you are free to do so. I'm just gonna label you as a psychopath. You only need to earn 70 stars in order to beat the final boss and finish the game. It made it so that you could skip some of the areas that you didn't like. It gave the anti-wet drought world club something not to do. And it would only be natural for Super Mario Sunshine to follow in the footsteps of the common decency that is logical game design. Too bad this thing is a mutation. To beat this game, you are required to beat the 7th episode of every level, and to make matters worse, you have to keep in mind that you have to beat every episode in order. So not only is your freedom taken away as to how you approach collecting shines in each world, you're also required to collect them to a certain threshold. By technicality, you are collecting the same amount of shines as stars in 64, but with much of the choice taken away from you, it makes going through the game feel like a checklist. There are other shine sprites you can collect, but they're made pointless by the fact that even if you do collect them, you're no closer to beating the game, which is stupid. Only 70 of the shines in this game are important. The other 50 are practically worthless if you're not a completionist. The same can be said about 64, but in that game, you could choose the 50 that you deem unnecessary. Super Mario Sunshine threatens your life until you do the Sandbird level. When 64 ran things, if you just absolutely despised Elevator Tour in the volcano, you could just take your business elsewhere. And I don't know why Super Mario Sunshine wouldn't follow the same design philosophy. Things are starting to make a lot more sense. But if there's one thing people love to tell you about this game, it's Well, it's in here somewhere. The physics that this game employs is nothing short of questionable. At its best, it makes use of Mario's moveset and brings agility to him that no other game in the Mario series can claim to have. Even FLUDD, at most times, works relatively well and doesn't give me any funny business. But that makes it all the more irritating when you get to certain sections where the game just starts making fun of you. There are certain sections of the game that do not feel designed with the given physics engine in mind, and the smart thing to do would probably have been to scrap those sections in favor of something that works and feels play tested. Because I want someone to come and tell me with a straight face that at least one person in the world will get any enjoyment out of the Poison River level. And building on the janky physics, the game just isn't as well polished as most of Nintendo's library. You look at a game from the same generation like Paper Mario and the Thousand-Year Door, and almost every aspect of its design and world are taken into consideration, so there's no dull spots where the controls only kinda work, or instances where objects move in a way that feels almost unnatural. Most Nintendo games aren't guilty of this. Nintendo polishes nearly all of their games until they have no visible issues, even with the bad ones. But I don't get the feeling that Nintendo did that with this game. Everything just feels off. It's not like 64 where it had these strange but thought-provoking environments where you could get lost in the loneliness and mystery of it all. I was fine with that approach. But many of the design choices and objects in this game don't feel like they fit in with the rest of Mario. I honestly don't know how to describe it all too well, because how am I supposed to describe whatever this is? Yoshi's in the game. If you thought I was going to go on and overextend a rant about how Yoshi in this game is an underutilized mess that never should have made it out of the planning phase, not today. So let's instead talk about the worst shine sprites in the game, because there sure are a few. I'm convinced that the Watermelon Festival level wants me dead. Moving the watermelon itself was something I never found to be all too hard, despite it being one of the jankiest objects in the game, but these cataquacks will forever be my mortal enemies. Sometimes I just feel like there's no way around these guys. It's been one of the few constants in life. The only redeeming factor that this level has is that it's not required to beat the game. I cannot say the same for the Shadow Mario missions though. There is one of these in each world, and they are so stupidly easy and frustrating at the same time. It happens so many times that it just becomes tedious, and it feels so inconsistent as to how much water it takes for him to start wailing. The Poison River. Oh my god. Not even taking into account the 4 years it takes you to get to the thing, the level itself can honestly be either the easiest thing ever, or it can be a nightmare. I've had runs where I can complete it on my first try with minimal issues, and I've also had times where I just couldn't do it. Blue coins. These things are insufferable. There are so many of them, and they're all required in order to get 100% completion. I have to look up a guide for most of these, because chances are I'm usually missing 1 or 2 of them, and I have no willpower to find it on my own fruition. And the blue coins takes up a huge chunk of the game's shine sprites, and I really don't want anything to do with them. All they feel like is padding because the developers couldn't meet the 120 quota, and they started getting desperate. So why is this one of my favorite Mario games again? Well, building off of the game's immersive qualities mentioned earlier, the levels in this game are some of the most relaxing and intriguing locations I've ever been to in a video game. You have a tropical amusement park, a tropical island hotel, a tropical lakeside town. Could you tell this game was tropical? The tropical resort theme this game goes for works to its advantage and helps in wiping the stains of the glaring flaws that this game is riddled with. You see, when I played this game, I'm not playing it because it has an incredible plot or the best levels in the franchise. I'm playing it because of how comforting it is. Sure, it can be frustrating at times, but even when all of that's going on, the game's style is such an ever-present force that it lifts the game up to the high value at which I hold it. If you're playing this game because you think it's a well-designed experience, there's the door. The only way you'll find enjoyment in this game is if you learn to accept its flaws and embrace what the game is best at. It's probably the worst 3D Mario game when looking at it from a pure gameplay perspective, but the charm that this game has is something that you won't find anywhere else. And if people don't like it, that's fine. I understand why people don't like this game, because it isn't a good game. But for people like me, who put more value in the experience the game itself can provide, this is easily one of the best games I could pop into my GameCube and settle with for an hour or two. But then that leaves the final question. Do games with an excessive amount of water deserve a second chance? No!